The silence on the bridge of the Mujang was not peaceful. It was the sharp, ringing quiet of a trap about to spring. The main viewer showed a tactical map that was becoming a solid wall of red. Hundreds of Krievik bioships, from small, fast skirmishers to massive, carrier-like hulks, were turning from the pale blue marble of Lumina and accelerating toward them. Space itself seemed to curdle with the motion of so many living vessels. On the radiant resolve, Ambassador Yoon watched the same data, her light flickering in a frantic pattern of dread. No, they are leaving the planet. They are all going for the human ship. We have doomed them. She opened the channel, her voice trembling. Captain Lee, you must disengage. Your ship cannot survive that many. Withdraw. Save yourselves. On the Mujong's bridge, Lee heard her plea. He looked at the faces of his crew. Kim was calm, her hands resting lightly on her console. June was sweating but focused. Young Park at the helm had a determined set to his jaw. Ambassador Yoon, Lee said, his voice steady, almost quiet. You asked for aid. You are receiving it. The evacuation of your people from Iridia is complete. The threat to your world, however, is not. If we run, they will return to the surface. And next time, they will be angrier. Today ends now. He closed the channel. Kim, status of the magnetospheric disruption cannon. Charged and ready, Captain. Coil integrity is at 100%. The field is stable. Power it to 40%. Target the leading cluster, the densest part of the swarm. Aye, sir. Powering to 40. Targeting solution locked. The crew worked with smooth efficiency. There was no panic. This was another procedure, another tool. On a world like Earth, you learn to use every force nature offered. Gravity, radiation, pressure, magnetism. You turn them into shields, into tools, and sometimes into weapons. The Kravek swarm closed the distance. The leading edges, the fast skirmishers, began to fire. Streams of glowing acid and sharp, calcified spines shot toward the Mujung. The human ship's point defense guns, simple rapid-fire kinetic turrets, spun up. They filled the space around the ship with a storm of metal, shredding the spines and detonating the acid globs before they could hit the hull. It was like a violent, silent rain on a tin roof. The larger ships came next, the carriers. Their sides opened, and swarms of smaller, fighter-like organisms, each the size of a shuttle, poured out. Thousands of them, a living cloud, aimed to overwhelm the Mujing by sheer numbers, to land on its hull and chew through. They're going to try to board, Kim observed. Let them get close, Lee said. All power to forward armor and kinetic barriers. Prepare for impact, and Kim, fire the cannon. There was no dramatic countdown. Kim pressed a sequence on her panel. Firing. For a second, nothing seemed to happen. There was no bright beam of light, no thunderous explosion. Then, space in front of the Mujong's bow wavered. It was like looking through heat haze, but it was cold, a distortion of pure magnetic force. The wave of fighter organisms hit the invisible field. They did not explode. They compressed. Every particle of ferrous material in their biological bodies, the iron in their blood analog, the trace metals in their chitin, was suddenly and violently pulled toward the center of the field. The organic parts were just along for the terrible ride. The cloud of thousands of creatures was yanked into a single shrinking point, crushed into a ball of screaming, pulped biology and twisted metal no bigger than the Mujung's command deck. Then the unstable ball, superheated by the energy of its own collapse, vaporized in a silent, short-lived flash. The leading cluster of larger bioships flew into the edges of the expanding field. The effect was slower, but just as absolute. Their grown hulls, woven with biological conductors, acted like perfect receivers. The ships didn't just crumple. They unraveled. Structural webbing tore apart. Organic circuits fused. They came to a sudden, grotesque stop, their forms twisting into impossible shapes before their internal systems failed and they went dark. Drifting tombs, but the hive mind was not done. The sheer, shocking loss triggered a final, brute force command from its deepest instinct: consume the remaining hundreds of ships. Ignoring their losses, pushed forward a mindless tidal wave of chitin and hunger. Aiming to physically swamp the human ship, Lee watched them come. They're not stopping. They're going to ram. Kinetic barriers cannot hold against that many direct impacts, Captain, Kim reported, her voice still calm. Estimated hull breach in 60 seconds. Lee nodded. He had one last card to play. A lesson from a planet where sometimes the only way to stop a wildfire was to start a bigger one. Redirect all remaining power, including life support reserves, to the cannon. Overload the coils. Set for a full sphere burst. On my mark? Sir, Kim said, a note of warning in her tone. A full sphere burst at this power will leave us dead in space. No engines, no life support. We will be adrift. I know, Lee said. Do it. The crew executed the order without hesitation. Lights dimmed on the bridge. The low hum of the engines died away, leaving an eerie silence. All power, every last joule, was fed into the massive coil wrapped around the Mujong's core. The swarm was moments away from impact. Fire, Lee said. This time, there was an effect. A blue-white ring of energy, visible only because it ionized the minute particles of space dust, exploded outward from the Mujing in every direction. It moved at the speed of light, that it was not an explosion. It was a reset. The pulse washed over the Kravik swarm. Every bioship, every organism linked to the hive mind, was hit by an electromagnetic shockwave of unimaginable power. It was the digital equivalent of a brain being flash-fried. Bioelectric signals shorted out. Neural webbing burned. The hive mind, a vast, interconnected consciousness, experienced a simultaneous system-wide seizure, and then nothing. The ships did not blow up. They just stopped. Their running lights died. Their organic engines shut down. The tidal wave of vessels became a lifeless, drifting field of scrap metal and silent biology, bumping gently against each other in the dark. On the Mujong, the lights were out. Emergency battery-powered strips cast long shadows. The air was getting cold. Lee unstrapped himself and floated gently in the zero gravity. Report. Kim's face was pale in the gloom. Full systems failure. We are on batteries. No engines. No long-range comms. Life support at 12% and falling. The cannon is fused. It will never fire again. She paused, looking at her sensors. But the swarm. Captain, the swarm is dead. No energy signatures. No life signs. They're just debris. A weak, crackling signal came through on a secondary channel. It was Ambassador Yoon, her voice full of awe so deep it was like fear. Mujung, what did you do? We are reading. No enemy signals. Lumina is clear. The sky is clear. How? How is this possible? Lee pulled himself to the comm station. Ambassador, the Kravik hive mind functioned like a nervous system. We gave it a stroke. Your world is safe. Your ship. Your power signatures are gone. Are you? We are here, Lee said, his breath making small clouds in the freezing air. We are alive. For now. We could use a tow. It took the Lumin hours to muster a functional tug from the shattered remains of their fleet. When they docked with the dark, silent Mujong, they found the humans waiting in the cold airlock, wrapped in thermal blankets. They looked exhausted, ordinary, not like gods or demons, just tired people. EUN, her light glowing with a soft, steady warmth she had not felt in cycles, floated before Captain Lee. She did not know how to thank him. Words felt too small. The concepts of her peaceful life had no frame for what he had done. Lee saved her the trouble. He gave a small, tired nod. "You sent a request for aid into the dark," he said, his voice hoarse. "You hoped for mercy, for the gentle help of the galaxy." He looked past her, at the viewport, toward the clean, quiet orbit of Lumina, and then at the dark, dead field that had been a swarm. "You didn't get gentle," he said. "You got the answer of a death world. We saw a threat to those who couldn't fight back. So we fought, with everything we are, with every harsh lesson our vicious, beautiful planet ever taught us. The job is done." He finally met her luminous gaze. "The Deathworlders have answered." The 7 minutes began. Sergeant Park's squad formed a tight circle around the emerging group of Lumin. The aliens moved with a soft, gliding grace, even in their fear, their bodies emitting a faint, nervous light. They huddled together, their large, luminous eyes fixed on the hulking, scarred forms of their protectors. The Kravek did not charge blindly this time. The hive mind had learned from the shocking violence of the first encounter. Instead of a wave, they came in a coordinated rush from 3 main alleys between the shattered crystal spires. The smaller, faster scouts came first, not to attack, but to spread out, to flank, to distract. Behind them, the heavier bruisers advanced in a tight phalanx, their armored fronts forming a living shield. Behind them, clicking and clattering, came a new form. Taller, thinner, with bulbous, pulsating sacs on their backs. New contact. Han called out. "Rear of the pack. Unknown type. Assume ranged bioweapon," Park said, his mind working fast. The geometry was bad. They were in a plaza, good for defense, but also for encirclement. Choi suppressed the flanks. "Don't let the little ones get behind us. Han J, with me on the heavies. Priority is breaking that shield wall before the shooters get in range." The air filled with noise again. Choi's rotary cannon swept left and right, its torrent of fire keeping the skittering scouts pinned down in the alleys, turning crystal into deadly shrapnel. But the heavy Kravek pushed through, their thick chitin deflecting some of the rounds, their sheer mass absorbing the punishment. The new, taller Kravek reached the back of the phalanx. They stopped, their bodies rippling. The sacs on their backs glowed a deep venomous green, and contracted. With wet thwips, globs of concentrated acid, larger and faster than the spit of the smaller ones, sailed over the heads of the bruisers, arcing down toward the human position. "Incoming?" Park yelled. The acid rained down. One glob hit the ground near a group of Lumin and ate through the crystal floor instantly, leaving a smoldering pit. Another hit Private J on the shoulder. The sizzle was louder this time, the smoke thicker. His suit alarms blared a sharper warning. Armor breach. Neutralizer engaging. J gritted his teeth as the internal systems flooded the area, fighting the acid. He stayed on his feet, but his left arm hung limp, the armor's servos fried. The shield wall of heavies was now only 20 meters away, and the acid shooters were preparing another volley. They were going to be crushed and melted. On the Muzhong, Captain Lee watched the tactical feed, his face stone. First Officer Kim spoke quietly. "The hive mind is adapting correctly. It's using combined arms. The squad is pinned. The evac shuttle is 4 minutes out." Lee didn't take his eyes off the screen. "They're thinking like a military, but they're thinking of us as just another tough predator. They're trying to match force with force." He opened the command channel. "Sergeant Park, you are cleared for protocol Baekdu. I repeat, cleared for Baekdu." Switch to disruptive measures. On the ground, Park heard the order. A fierce grin spread across his face. All right, you ugly bugs. You want a lesson? Let's give you one. Choi. Sonic emitter now. Set it to frequency 7. Han, switch to incendiaries and target the shooters in the back. Jay, fall back and cover the Lumin. The change was instantaneous. Choi stopped firing his cannon. He dropped to one knee, pulling a heavy, disc-like device from his back. He slammed it into the crystal and hit a switch dot. It didn't make a loud noise. It made a sound. A deep, pulsing thrum that was felt more than heard. It vibrated up through the boots of the humans, a nasty, teeth-aching resonance. For the Kravik, with their complex internal biology and sensitive chitinous plates, it was agony. The frequency was specifically tuned to vibrate their internal organ clusters. The effect was immediate and horrific. The advancing wall of heavies shuddered as one. They didn't scream. They had no mouths for it, but their entire bodies convulsed. They stumbled, their coordination shattered. Some fell, their legs twitching uncontrollably. The rigid shield wall dissolved into a twitching, vulnerable mass dot at the same moment. Han shouldered her rifle and pulled a shorter, broader weapon from her thigh. The grenade launcher coughed, sending a canister high into the air. It burst above the acid shooters, not with fire, but with a cloud of fine, metallic dust. The second canister she fired burst into a sparking, white-hot ignition source as it hit the ground. Among them, the cloud of dust ignited. The thermal bloom was sudden and intense. The thin atmosphere made the flames behave strangely, whipping and roaring with a frantic energy. The acid shooters were engulfed. Their volatile biosacs cooked off in chain reactions, adding their own violent explosions to the inferno. The Kravik assault fell apart. The hive mind, so used to processing simple inputs fight, consume, adapt, was flooded with contradictory, painful data. Sonic vibrations disrupted its control signals. Uncontrollable fire created panic in a species that feared intense heat. The elegant, coordinated attack broke down into chaos. Park didn't let up. Forward. Push them back. Give the evac some room. He led the charge, not at the twitching heavies, but around them, firing precise bursts into the vulnerable joints of the fallen creatures. They were no longer an army. They were a collection of confused, pained organisms. The evac shuttle, a blunt, armored craft, descended from the sky with a roar of thrusters, kicking up clouds of crystal dust. It landed in the center of the plaza, its ramp slamming down. "Move! Move!" Park boomed, his external speakers projecting over the din. He and his squad physically guided the terrified Lumin, ushering them toward the shuttle with gentle but firm pushes. The Lumin flowed up the ramp, their light flickering with relief and confusion. From her vantage point on the Radiant Resolve, Yoon watched the last of her people from Iridia scramble to safety. She saw the humans, one wounded, still firing, still holding the line against the enemy that was now in full disorganized retreat. The raw, adaptive violence of it was terrifying. They hadn't just used bigger guns. They had changed the rules of the fight entirely. The shuttle ramp began to close. The last human, Sergeant Park, backed toward it, still firing short bursts down an alley. He turned and leaped inside just as the ramp sealed. The shuttle lifted off. Engines flaring, leaving a circle of burning. Twitching Kravik and the shattered, but now silent. Plaza Dot in the sudden quiet on the ground, the hive mind reassessed. It had thrown logic and force at the new enemy, and the enemy had responded with chaos and pain. A new priority, primal and overwhelming, rose from the collective consciousness of the swarm. The source of this pain was not on the ground, not every sensory node. Every ship-based mind in the Lumina system turned its attention upward. the single, blocky alien ship in high orbit. The Mujung. It was the brain. It was the nest. It had to be consumed? On the Mujung's bridge, the alarm was a continuous shrill bleat. Captain! Massive shift in the swarm. They're disengaging from all planetary targets. Every bioship in the system is changing course. They're coming for us. Officer June's voice was tight. The main viewer switched to a tactical map. Hundreds of red dots were turning, like iron filings to a magnet, all streaming toward the single green dot that represented their ship. Lee leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the converging tide. The Deathworlders had answered the call. Now they faced the full, furious attention of the swarm. The first thing Sergeant Park noticed was the air. Or rather, the lack of it. His suit's display flashed green for atmosphere, but threw up warnings about low oxygen partial pressure and reduced density. It was like breathing on top of a very high mountain. The second thing he noticed was the gravity. Or, again, the lack of it. He felt light, almost buoyant. A small jump sent him higher than he intended. This would take some getting used to. The third thing he noticed was the enemy. A wave of Kravik, each the size of a large dog, was scrambling over the shattered crystal landscape toward his drop pod. They moved in a skittering, chittering rush, all claws and clicking mandibles and dripping mouthparts. They made no sound he could hear, but the sight was enough. Contact! Front and wide. Park barked, his voice calm inside the helmet. Choi, left flank. Han, right. Jay, with me. Controlled bursts. Make them count. He raised his rifle, a heavy, blocky thing with a large magazine. He didn't aim at the lead creature. He aimed at the crystal ground 3 meters in front of the rushing, pack, and squeezed the trigger. The sound was a deafening crack, crack, crack that shattered the alien silence. Solid core slugs, moving faster than sound, tore into the crystalline surface. They didn't just pierce it. They blew it apart. Sharp, glittering shrapnel exploded outward in a deadly cloud. The front ranks of Kravik were shredded, their chitin armor no match for the flying spears of alien rock. The creatures behind stumbled over the twitching remains. On the right, Private Han's weapon spoke in a lower, heavier rhythm. Her squad automatic rifle hammered, each round a small explosion of kinetic energy. Where a round hit a Kravik, it didn't just make a hole. The impact lifted the creature off its many legs, spinning it around, often tearing limbs off before it hit the ground. Private Choi, on the left, simply held the trigger of his rotary cannon. The weapon spun up with a whine. It quickly became a roar, a continuous thunder of fire. A stream of heavy slugs tore into a thicker cluster of Kravik, advancing from a collapsed archway. It wasn't a fight. It was demolition. The creatures and the crystal structure behind them were turned into a pulpy, splintered mess in seconds. The initial assault broke against the human line like a wave against a cliff. The Kravik hive mind, sensing significant resistance, paused. The skittering stopped. For a moment, there was an eerie quiet, broken only by the ringing in the humans' ears and the hiss of their suit vents got up on the radiant resolve. Ambassador Yoon watched the feed from orbital drones. She saw the violence, the raw, shocking power of the human weapons. She saw the Kravik, a terror that had conquered her world, being torn apart with what seemed like casual ease. She felt a mix of revulsion and a desperate, soaring hope. Their weapons? They are so crude. So loud, Myung whispered beside her. They are effective, Yoon said, her light pulsing faster. Look, they are not just shooting. They are moving. On the ground, Park was already advancing. Forward. To the city's edge. Don't let them dig in. He didn't walk. He ran. In the low gravity, his powered armor-assisted strides were enormous, covering 5 meters at a time. His squad matched him, leaping over crevices and fallen spires with an agility that seemed impossible for their bulky forms. They reached the first outlying structures of Iridia. Here, the Kravik had tried to set up. Larger creatures, like tanks of chitin and muscle, were pushing against a fragile-looking energy barrier that glowed around a central spire, a last sanctuary for hundreds of Lumin. One of the tank-like Kravik turned, a glowing sac under its jaw pulsing. It spat a glob of glowing green acid. The projectile flew through the air and splattered directly across Private J's chestplate. EUN gasped. That acid ate through Lumin battle armor in heartbeats. On J's suit, the acid sizzled violently, sending up plumes of smoke. Alerts flashed on his display, but the armor held. The outer ceramic layer bubbled and blackened, but a viscous fluid seeped from pores around the impact site, mixing with the acid and hardening into a tuff. Dark Seal.J looked down at his chest, then back at the creature. He didn't say a word. He just raised his rifle and put 3 rounds into the glowing sack. The creature exploded in a shower of corrosive gore and shattered shell. Acid is neutralized, Jay reported, his voice flat. Armor integrity at 80%. Captain Lee's voice came over the squad channel from orbit. Sergeant, the hive mind is adapting. They're pulling the smaller ones back and bringing more heavies forward. They're trying to match your force. Park saw it. The skittering scouts were retreating, and more of the tank-like bruisers were clumping together, forming a living wall between the humans and the Lumin sanctuary. They think this is about who's harder, Park said, a grin in his voice. They don't get it, Choi. Incendiary mix, high arc, behind their line. Han J, on my mark, we go through the middle. Fast and sharp. Choi shouldered his rotary cannon and pulled a different, thicker weapon from his back. It was a grenade launcher. He aimed high and fired. The projectile sailed over the advancing wall of heavy Kravik and landed behind them with a thump. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a sun bloomed on the surface of Lumina. White-hot chemical fire erupted, burning with a terrifying hunger. In Lumina's thin atmosphere, the fire behaved differently. It clung and spread voraciously, sucking the oxygen from the air around it. The Kravik caught in the blast didn't just burn. They were flash-consumed, turned to ash in an instant. The living wall flinched, the hive mind recoiling from the sudden, shocking heat. Now! Park yelled. He didn't charge at the wall. He and Han and Jay ran along it, to the side, their speed in the low gravity making them blurred, confusing targets. They poured fire into the flanks of the disoriented creatures. The focused kinetic energy was too much. Chitin plates cracked. Legs were sheared off. The wall began to crumble. They were through. In front of them was the shimmering energy barrier of the Lumin sanctuary. Dozens of slender, light-filled faces were pressed against the barrier from inside, watching them with a mixture of terror and awe. Park approached the barrier. He knew the Lumin inside could likely hear him on external speakers. He kept his voice low, calm. People of Iridia, we are from Earth. We are here to help. We are going to get you out. Please follow the instructions of my soldiers. We will keep you safe. He turned his back to the barrier, facing the smoking, chaotic ruins of the city. More Kravik were coming, drawn by the disturbance. They poured from side streets and burrowed up from underground. Park switched to his command channel. Captain, we have made contact with survivors at Objective Alpha. Enemy is attempting to encircle. Requesting evac vector. On the bridge of the Muzhong, Lee watched the tactical display. A dozen small green dots, his squad, were holding a perimeter around a blinking blue dot, the sanctuary. A swirling, angry red tide of Kravik was converging on them from all over the city. Acknowledged, Sergeant, Lee said. Evac shuttle is on its way. It will be there in 7 minutes. You have to hold for 7 minutes. On the ground, Park looked at the hundreds of Lumin, now slowly, hesitantly, emerging from the sanctuary. They were so fragile. He looked at the red tide closing in on his tactical map. 7 minutes was a very long time. He took a deep breath of the thin, processed air. You heard the man, teen. We just bought a 7-minute ticket. Let's make sure these good people get to use it. He raised his rifle again. No one gets through. The journey to the Lumina system was not a smooth one. The Mujang pushed its engines far beyond their recommended limits. The ship groaned and vibrated around the crew, a constant reminder of the strain. Inside, the atmosphere was tense and focused. There were no grand speeches. The crew moved with a quiet purpose, checking systems, running simulations, and studying every scrap of data from the Lumin's distress call. Captain Lei spent most of his time on the bridge, watching the star lines streak past. First Officer Kim was often beside him, her face lit by the glow of a data slate. They were analyzing the Kravek. The swarm intelligence is decentralized but linked, Kim said, her voice flat. Kill one, and the hive mind barely notices. You have to disrupt the larger clusters, the nodes. Their biology is tough. Chitinous armor can deflect standard energy beams. They use a powerful organic acid for close combat and for breaking down structures. Lee nodded. So energy weapons are less effective. Good thing we never fully trusted them. What about their ships? Same biological principle. They're grown, not built. Tough, but their structural integrity relies on a kind of organic weave. Sustained kinetic force or extreme thermal shock should crack them open. Lee allowed himself a small, grim smile. Kinetic force and fire. Two things humanity understood very, very well. And the Lumin world? Lumina. 0.8 standard gravity. Thin atmosphere, high in argon, low in oxygen. Average temperature is cool. Their cities are primarily silicate crystal. Low gravity. Thin air, Lee repeated. He turned to his crew. Listen up. Lumina will feel like a high mountain plateau back home. You'll be lighter. You'll be faster. But the air is thin. Your suits will compensate, but be aware of your stamina. This isn't a strength fight. It's a speed and shock fight. Down in the armory, Sergeant Park was overseeing the preparation of the drop teams. The soldiers Choi, Han Jae, and others were checking their gear with a methodical comb that spoke of long practice. The gear was not sleek. It was heavy, angular, and covered in matte, non-reflective paint. Private Choi hefted the main squad support weapon, a large caliber rotary cannon fed by a heavy ammo box. Think it'll punch through, Sarge? Park slapped the side of the weapon. This fires solid slugs the size of your thumb at a rate of 5,000 per minute. On Earth, it stops a charging bull elephant in its tracks. If it doesn't punch through, the impact will knock whatever it is into next week. Nearby, Private Han was checking her armor seals. The suit was a hulking thing, but she moved in it with a familiar ease. The briefing says their acid can melt through Lumin crystal in seconds. Our outer layer is a ceramic polymer blend, Park said. Self-sealing. Remember your training on the Venusian sims? Acid rain is a walk in the park. If you get a breach, your suit will patch it and flood the area with neutralizer. Don't panic. Just keep firing. Their weapons were simple, brutal things. Rifles that fired hardened metal spikes. Grenade launchers. Flamethrowers labeled incinerator units. There were no gentle hums of power cells. Only the solid clack of magazines being seated and the hiss of hydraulic systems. Back on the bridge, the final alarm sounded. Approaching the Lumina system transition point, Officer Park at navigation called out. All hands brace for transition, Lee said, his voice calm over the ship-wide com. This might be rough. Most ships slipped into normal space with a shimmer, a gentle deceleration. The Muzhong, with its overpowered engines and heavy-duty frame, did not. Space itself seemed to crack in front of it. There was a loud, thunderous boom that resonated through the hull, a sound of reality, protesting the violence of the ship's arrival. The crew were shoved forward in their harnesses as the ship decelerated hard, plowing through the subtle medium of space dot on the view screen. The Lumina system resolved. It was a scene of destruction. The glittering debris of Lumin vessels floated silently. Further in, they could see the greenish-brown dots of Kravik bioships circling the pale blue world. Multiple contacts. Kravik swarm vessels, hundreds of them. They've detected us. June yelled from sensors. 3 larger bioships are breaking orbit and heading our way. Evasive pattern beta, Lee ordered. Do not let them surround us. Kim, hail the Lumin flagship. Let them know we're here. On the dying radiant resolve, the alert was a weak chime. Ambassador Yoon, her light almost gray with despair, looked up. A vessel? Is it? Concordance? It just translated in, Ambassador. Its signature. It's enormous. And violent. The energy reading is primitive. Massive fusion and fission traces. It's the ship that answered the beacon. Yoon felt a flutter, not of hope, but of dread. Had they attracted scavengers after all? Put them on. The face that appeared on her viewer was unlike any she had seen. The skin was weathered. The eyes held a deep, focused intensity, and the lines on his face spoke of a life under a harsh sun. Lumin vessel, this is Captain Lee of the Galactic Confederacy survey vessel Muzhong, Earth registered. We received your request for aid. What is your tactical status? The voice was steady, the translation clear. He had come. 1 ship. You? You answered? Yoon managed to say. But you are alone? The Kravik. They have 1,000 ships. They are a tide. You cannot fight a tide. We've dealt with tides before, Lee said, his tone not boasting, just stating a fact. We are deploying rapid response teams to your planetary surface, focusing on the population centers your beacon highlighted. We need direct coordinates and all atmospheric data. Your world has 0.8 standard gravity? A thin atmosphere? Yes, Yoon said, utterly confused. Why was that his first question? How is that relevant? Lee almost smiled. It's relevant to my people. It means on your world, we can move very, very fast. Prepare for deployment. We will clear you a landing zone. The channel closed. Yoon turned to Myung. What are they? Their ship. It arrived like a hammer blow. Their captain asks about gravity. Myung was studying the new sensor data. The ship's composition. It's incredibly dense. And their life signs? Ambassador, their baseline metabolic rate is off the scale. Their body temperature, their cellular energy output. It's like looking at a chemical fire compared to our gentle glow. They are not like any species in the concordance. Before Yoon could process this, they saw the Muzhong act. The 3 approaching Kravik bioships fired streams of glowing green acid. The Muzhong didn't try to dodge gracefully. It turned, presenting its heavily armored side. The acid stream splashed across the hull, sizzling and smoking, but not penetrating. Then, small turrets on the Muzhong's hull swiveled. They didn't fire lasers. They fired solid projectiles in short, sharp bursts. The sound didn't travel through space, but the effect was clear. The front of the lead bioship splintered and erupted into frozen organic pulp. It drifted away, dead. The other 2 ships tried to move closer, to board or envelop the human ship. The Muzhong's main engines flared, and it simply rammed one. There was no finesse. The Kravek ship, organic and tough, met the Mujung's tungsten-reinforced prow and shattered like an egg. On the Radiant Resolve, the bridge was silent in shock. On the Mujung, Lee watched the last bioship break off and flee. Enough playing around. Sergeant Park, are your teams ready? Locked and loaded, Captain. Park's voice came through the com. Drop zone is confirmed. Lumin City of Iridia. The Kravek are thick on the ground there. You have one job. Make a hole. Hold it, and show them the guests have arrived. Aye, sir. Initiating drop in 10. From the belly of the Mujung, a dozen heavy canisters were ejected. They were drop pods, but they looked more like giant bullets. They fell toward the pale world, their surfaces already glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry. They didn't slow until the last possible second, when retro thrusters fired with a series of thunderous booms that echoed across the crystal plains of Lumina. A Kravek on the ground, busy dismantling a glowing spire, turned their clicking heads toward the sound. They saw the pods slam into the ground, not gently, but with craters of force and shattered crystal. The hatches blew off, and the Deathworlders stepped out. The silence on the bridge of the Lumin flagship was the worst kind. It was not peaceful. It was the silence of a dying hope, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft, sad chimes of failing systems and the occasional shudder that ran through the graceful crystal hull. Outside the main viewer, the beautiful world of Lumina hung in space, its usual soft blue and white shimmer, now stained with ugly blotches of brown and sickly green. The Kravik swarm was eating it alive. Ambassador Yoon watched, her body of gentle, contained light pulsing slowly with a grief so deep it threatened to extinguish her. Her people were not made for this. The Lumin were thinkers, artists, weavers of light and sound. They built cities that sang in the wind and glowed with inner peace. They had no weapons, no armies. Their defense was the goodwill of the Galactic Concordance, pact of many species who promised to protect the gentle and the wise. That pact had shattered like glass. The Kravik were a tide of teeth and acid and mindless hunger. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed, leaving behind only shattered silicate and barren rock. The Concordance fleet, what little had come, had been torn apart weeks ago. Now, it was just the Radiant Resolve and a few other civilian ships, hiding in the dark, watching the end. The last sanctuary city has fallen, a soft voice said beside her. It was her aide, a young Lumin named Myung. His light was faint, flickering with fear. Eun did not turn. She kept her gaze on her home. There was one thing left, one desperate ancient act. Activate the Grand Beacon, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ambassador? The protocol is clear. The beacon is for a galactic emergency. It calls to anyone, everyone. It has no filters. We could attract worse than the Krayavek. Scavengers, raiders. What is worse than extinction? Yoon asked, finally looking at him. Activate it. Send our request for aid. Show them what is happening here. Show them our children hiding in the crystal caves. Show them the beauty that is being erased. Send it all, on every frequency, in every known translation protocol. Someone must hear. With a heavy heart, Myung entered the commands. Deep within the ship, an ancient device, older than the Concordance itself, hummed to life. It gathered the data, the images of burning spires. The screens translated into light patterns, the biological profile of the Kravik, the coordinates, and then, with a final pulse of the ship's dying power, it sent it all roaring into the void. A shout into the dark. On the bridge, they felt the power drain. The lights dimmed further. The request for aid was sent. There was nothing left to do but wait, and hope the darkness had a heart. Weeks of travel away, on the very fringe of charted space, the Galactic Confederacy survey vessel Mujong was doing what it did best, surviving. It was not a pretty ship. Where Lumin vessels were flowing curves and light, the Mujong was all hard angles and reinforced plates. Its hull was pockmarked with micro-impacts and streaked with the residual burn marks of atmospheric entry. It looked less like a starship and more like a bunker that had learned to fly. On its command deck, Captain Lee scrolled through a mineral survey report. It was quiet. The silence on the Mujong was a comfortable one, born of a crew who knew their jobs and a ship that was, for the moment, not in imminent danger. First Officer Kim was at her station, running diagnostics on the main engine. She was a woman of few words, but her calm competence was the bedrock of Lee's command. "Anything on the long-range scan, June?" Lee asked, not looking up from his report dot at the sensor station. Officer June, a man with a perpetual squint from staring at screens, shook his head. "Nothing but cosmic dust and the usual background whisper, sir. It's a quiet neighborhood." That changed in an instant. A sharp, piercing alarm cut through the quiet. Not a battle alert, but a priority communication chime, raw and unfiltered. June jerked upright, his hands flying over his console. "Captain, incoming wideband omnidirectional burst. Massive data packet. It's overriding standard channels. It's on every frequency." Lee put his report down. "Origin? Triangulating. It's from the Lumina system, deep in Contordan's core space." June's eyes widened as the translation protocols began to work. "It's a distress call, a general plea for aid. Visual and biological data incoming." Put it on the main viewer. The image that flickered to life in the center of the bridge made the crew of the Mujong go still. They saw crystalline cities of breathtaking beauty. They saw those cities being overrun by a seething, clicking nightmare of black chitin and dripping acid. They saw slender beings of light trying to flee, only to be cut down or dissolved. The message was not just data. It was emotion and profound, desperate sadness and fear that the translation software could only hint at. The visual ended with a simple, repeating text string in numerous languages. Aid requested. Lumina system. Species extinction imminent. Any assistance. The silence on the Mujong was different now. It was heavy. Officer June cleared his throat. "The Kravik. Swarm-type xenofauna. Concordance database tags them as a Category 4 biohazard. Standard protocol is immediate quarantine and, if necessary, orbital sterilization of infested worlds." Kim turned from her station, her face unreadable. "The Lumin are a Concordance protectorate. Where is the Concordance fleet?" June called up more data. Sparse signals indicate major fleet engagements nearby. Possible defeat or withdrawal. The Concordance is not responding to this beacon. Lee leaned back in his chair, the old material groaning. He stared at the frozen image on the viewer, a single Lumin child, its light dim, hiding in a crystal crevice as shadowy forms scuttled past. "So they sent out a call to anyone," he said quietly. "Sir," Kim said, her voice careful, "we are a survey vessel. Our armament is defensive. Our mandate is exploration and first contact assessment. This is a war zone. That is a full-scale xenofauna consumption event. Our intervention would be statistically insignificant." Lee knew she was right. By any logical, tactical measure, it was a suicide mission. One ship against a planet-consuming swarm. He looked around at his bridge crew. June at sensors, Young Park at navigation, Quiet Sumin at life support. They were all from Earth, from Sol 3, a planet the Concordance classifiers, in their dry, scientific way, called a death world. A planet of extreme gravity, violent weather, predatory megafauna, and rampant microbiology that treated alien cells like a party. A planet where survival was not a guarantee, but a daily fight won through grit, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness. He thought of the Lumin's gentle light. He thought of the Kravik's mindless hunger. And he thought of the absolute, crushing silence that would follow if no one answered that call. They didn't ask for the concordance, Lee said, his voice hardening. They asked for aid. They asked for anyone. He stood up. Well, we are anyone. And we are from a world where we learned one thing above all else. You don't let the bullies win. Not when someone is asking for help. He saw the understanding dawn in Kim's eyes. She gave a single, slow nod. Helm, Lee said, his command voice filling the quiet bridge. Plot a maximum burn course for the Lumina system. Use the gravity well of the brown dwarf at Maha 7 for a slingshot. I want us there yesterday. Aye, Captain. Park responded, his hands already moving. Kim, power up all defensive systems. Prioritize point defense and hull integrity. I want our armor as ready as it can be. On it. June, open a channel back to Earth Command. Send this tight beam Priority 1. Lee took a breath and spoke the words that would commit them. Humanitarian intervention requested. Engaging. The Mujung's massive engines, built for power over elegance, thrummed to life. The ship turned, a slow, deliberate movement of immense mass, pointing its scarred nose toward a distant, dying star. On the edge of the viewer, the repeating plea for aid still flashed. A request for aid had been sent into the silent, uncaring galaxy. And against all logic, against all odds, from a forgotten corner of space, the Deathworlders were preparing their answer.